Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 50 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, let's see. I want to talk about websites. I want to talk about websites for a couple of different reasons. First of all, I was reminded about websites when Photo District News, that terrific periodical that I hope you're all reading, based out of New York City. Initially, Photo District News was a publication that was only about New York and only about the photo district in New York, and ultimately they became a national, international publication that talks about the business of photography and also about the commercial and fine art worlds of photography, with the tremendous authority. They are a terrific publication, and I heartily encourage you to read them. And a recent issue was their photo annual, where they put out the word several months ago for photographers to submit work, both in terms of photographic images, but also in terms of ways in which they are promoting themselves. So promotional pieces, and of course, part of that promotional strategy is a website. And I know that most of the people out there who are listening to Camera Position probably have a website of some sort. And I wanted to take a look at what your website tells you about you by what it is that it's telling the outside world about you. So I was prompted to think about this for a couple of different reasons. One is Photo District News in its current issue and now also online, and I'll link that here both in the enhanced version of the podcast and also on the cameraposition.com website, has a listing of what they think are some of the best photographers' websites out there. So that was one of the biggies, and in terms of prompting me to do this episode of Camera Position. Another biggie for me, though, was the fact that, boy, I get a lot of email. I'm delighted to get email. I'm sorry if sometimes it takes me a while to answer notes especially from listeners to the podcast. Sometimes it just takes me a while to get around to answering everybody. But I get a lot of email, and I get a lot of email from people saying, hey, could you take a look at my photographs here on my website? It could be a Flickr page, and we'll talk about Flickr here in a second. It could be a private web page. It could be a number of different ways in which somebody's asking me to take a look at their photographs. And I'm always happy to look at photographs. One of the things I think is a huge benefit about being a photographer in the first place is that generally we all love to look at photographs, and I am no exception to that rule. I love looking at photographs. I sometimes don't get a chance to respond to everybody who asks me to look at their photographs and make some sort of comment about them. But when I can, I do. And I have looked at a lot of photographers' websites, especially over the last couple of years, year and a half or whatever, since I've been doing Camera Position, and I've had a lot of people saying, hey, could you take a look at my work? And as I've looked at those websites, boy, is it ever interesting to see what it is that people do to present themselves to the outside world. And oftentimes, the comment that I make back to people when they're asking me about their websites is focus. Not camera focus, but focus. Focus your efforts, your energies on what it is that you want your website to do for you. So one of the questions that I'm going to ask you to ask yourself right off the top is, what do you want your website to accomplish for you? Do you simply want it to be a repository of everything that you have made a photograph of, maybe perhaps in your entire life? Or do you want your website to spend some time convincing the rest of the world that what you're doing is worth taking a look at? And by that I mean focusing your energies on what it is that you do best. What is your message? Now, if we think about this, really, much of what I've been trying to get across here with Camera Position over the last bunch of months has had to do with focusing your message. Who are you as a photographer? What do you find interesting, and what do you want to do with your image making? And if you take a look at your website, take a look and find out what it looks like. Do you have a website that has 7,000 photographs on it, none of which are particularly related to one another, and none of which have any kind of thematic concept, but rather are just unrelated images that might be beautiful, might be effective, might be interesting, might be thought-provoking, but don't exist in sequence or series. So I would encourage you to take a look at your website and take a look at how that website conveys who you are as an image maker. And one of the questions that I'd like you to ask yourself is, what do I want my website to do for me? Do I want people to know me as a particular type of photographer? And I've got a couple of sites here that I think are particularly useful. One is a photographer who I find just a terrific image maker and somebody I've been wanting to talk about on Camera Position for some time, Michael Kenna. Kenna, I think, is one of our most talented photographers working today, so especially in black and white. His sort of spare style, the consistent use of the square format, all of those things just really add up for me to be just a remarkable image maker, and one who has been consistent in his approach to the medium ever since I can remember encountering him years ago. So here's a guy who not only has a sort of spare style to his photography, but his website carries that through as well. So when we look at his website, what we look at are images that really relate to the way it is that he looks at the world, but also a design of the website that relates to the way his images look, and also a website that really clearly tells us what he's up to. It explains where he is as a photographer. So once you're past the seemingly obligatory splash page, I'm not a big fan of splash pages. At least Kenna's does not animate, does not have a long preload time. It just gets us to his site and tells us that we're about to enter it. But once you get past that splash page, take a look, if you will, and it's michaelkenna.net. And I'll have that linked both here in the podcast and on cameraposition.com. Once you get to his main webpage, take a look at what it is that he's telling us he's got. He's got an archive. He's got recent work. This is the menu down the left-hand side. He's got books and publications, his exhibitions resume, interviews, upcoming, gallery representatives, commercial work, and contact. So he's pretty clearly telling us what it is that he's interested in having us look at. His recent work, an archive of work that we can look at that covers things that are not recent, and then some ancillary information, books and publications, exhibitions resume, etc., etc., etc. So gallery representatives give us a place to take a look at buying his work. Boy, I can't tell you how many people whose websites I look at, and they clearly are interested in selling us work, but there is no place on the site where it says buy something, sales inquiry, any of those kinds of things. So, if you're interested in selling something and you don't tell people, here's where you can go to find information about buying things, then you're kind of missing the mark. So Kenna has that stuff covered. I also wanted to take a look at Julie Blackman's website. Julie Blackman, a contemporary photographer whose work I think is really pretty interesting. And Blackman's website, which is blackmanphotos.com, and we'll talk about domain names here in just a second, but blackmanphotos.com, Julie Blackman's website, she has, again, right there on her main page, Domestic Vacations, which is the name of a project, Mind Games, the name of another project, and those two projects are separated as a separate little section of two titles of things, and that's our presumption that those are projects. And so she is telling us, I have two projects. I have one called Domestic Vacations. I have another one called Mind Games. And then a little bit farther down on that list of menu items, representation, statement, bio, prices, contact. So she's very clear about what it is that she wants. She is telling us that she has these two projects called Domestic Vacations, another one called Mind Games. She's telling us that she has representation and who those people might be, a statement about the work, a bio that tells us about her, prices for procuring work, and then also contact information. So she's very clear. It's a very spare, very simple site. There's not a lot to it in terms of what we see on that main page. And of course, clicking on those pages, on those links rather, bring us to those places on her website where we can find information about where it is we can find out more about Julie Blackman, including an email address and contact information for her gallery representatives, etc., etc. So here are two photographers, successful photographers, who are out there telling us about who they are, what they're interested in, and being very clear about where we can go to find out more information about them. Notice that both of them have websites that incorporate their name. And hopefully, most of you have already procured a domain name for your website. I think domain names are incredibly important. And I think it's very important that your domain name has really the most ideal one is one that has your first name, last name. So, michaelkenna.net. Boy, that's a terrific website. It's sort of surprising to me that he doesn't have michaelkenna.com because .com is the most common web name. But when I'm looking for information about a photographer, I am most likely to type in their first name and their last name and find out if I come up with, michaelkenna.com. In fact, Kenna's is michaelkenna.net, but, there you go. He is really clear about who he is and where he is. And so if you wind up with a website that is, specialphotos.com, well, how is somebody going to find that it is you at specialphotos.com? So I would encourage you to buy domain names if you haven't already. And boy, they're really cheap now. These domain sales places like GoDaddy and mydomain.com and so forth are selling domain names for certainly a lot less than when I bought my first domain name, jeffcurdo.com. I think I paid like $150 or something for the first year of having that. Now I'm paying a lot less than that for, like a decade of that domain name. So another thing is buying domain names with project names. So when you think about starting a project and you name that project, sort of like what we talked about last time in terms of naming the project before you start the project, like Alex Soth suggests, perhaps buying that domain name for that project can be a very useful thing, because if you end up later with an exhibition calendar for that project or a book for that project, now you've got a landing place for people who are interested in that particular project and can remember it by name, and it helps build that brand recognition. And really, that's what we're talking about, right? We're really talking about developing an identity for yourself as a photographer and developing an identity for yourself in terms of how the outside world perceives you, but also how you're presenting yourself and the way in which you think of yourself as an image maker. So, whether your website is a Flickr site, and there are a lot of people, including me, who have pictures up on Flickr, and I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of articles recently about how Flickr has become a very important, even though they don't market themselves, Flickr does not market themselves as a photo marketing space. There are apparently a lot of art directors and art buyers and curators and so forth trolling through Flickr looking for imagery and finding it and contacting photographers through their Flickr sites. And I know a lot of photographers who use Flickr as one of their major places to hold their images. And I know that a lot of you have Flickr sites. I have a Flickr site. I don't do too much with it, but I sure know that there are those images out there working for me while I am doing other things, sleeping and teaching and doing all those other sorts of things. So those kinds of things are really important. Clear presentation of your ideas as a photographer, trying to be very clear and very straightforward about what it is that you're interested in. If you have a website that has 77 links on the front page, where is somebody supposed to go first? And how are they supposed to know what's the thing that is most important to you? And how are they supposed to figure out who you are and what you represent as a photographer and how you are different from the other photographers out there? So think about the way your website presents you, and think about how that presentation may or may not relate to the issues that you have as an image maker. What is it that you're presenting yourself as an image maker, and how do you think about yourself as a photographer? So try to pare down, simplify, focus your website on what it is that you're interested in and how you want to present yourself. And I would consider, as I have suggested over time, looking at your photographic life in terms of projects, I would strongly consider looking at your imagery relative to projects that you might do and thinking about organizing your website according to projects. But more than that, thinking about organizing your websites in a hierarchical fashion so that the project that is most important to you, that has the most relevance, that is perhaps the most current project that you're working on, has top billing. And it is the thing that you are identifying yourself with for the time being. And it could be that that project might last 6 months. It could maybe last 6 weeks. It could last 6 years or 16 years. It doesn't really matter. Of course, the web is such a flexible medium in terms of how we change things or are able to change things over time. But think about how your website identifies you as a photographer and the way in which your website tells the world, and just as importantly, tells you about who you want to be as a photographer. Focus yourself, focus your site, and focus your attentions on what it is that you want to portray in your images and how you want to be seen by the world. And I think that once you focus your energies on how you want the world to see you, you can more easily focus your energies on who you are and how you see yourself as an image maker. Well, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate everybody who is listening. I know that I have a bunch of new subscribers. I've seen you out there, and thanks for being here. And I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Camera Position is a proud member of the Photocast Network, your photo resource in the potosphere. photocastnetwork.com